Hello, this is a quick explanation of the difference between atoms, elements, compounds, mixtures and particles, because all of these terms are used to describe what stuff is made of, and it gets very confusing when you don't know the difference between each of these different terms. So these are your key words: atom, element, compound, mixture and particle. And I'm going to draw some quick diagrams just to outline the differences between them. So everything in the universe is made of small particles called atoms. Atoms are the smallest particle that can exist by itself. So everything you can think of that exists in this universe is made out of atoms. So here are some atoms, and you can see from the colour of them and the size of them that all of these atoms are exactly the same as each other. And when all of the atoms in a substance are identical, we can call this substance an element. So let's have a look at another element. So in this box, I'm going to draw another element. Oh, hang on, that's not in the right place. Okay, so this is also an element, and it's an element because every single atom in this box is exactly the same. Now, these are actually coming paired up, and that's fine. This particular element goes round in twos, it exists in pairs, and that's fine, but if all of the atoms are exactly the same, it's still an element. Now, this element is clearly different to this element. These are two different elements. This type of atom is different from this type of atom. So let's just label atoms on there as well so that you don't forget which ones they are. Okay, so every circle is an atom. It's a particle, the smallest particle that exists by itself. So there's an atom, there's an atom, there's an atom. And here's two atoms stuck together, two atoms stuck together, two atoms stuck together. Okay? And these are both elements because all of the atoms inside a box are identical to each other. But these elements are different to each other because these atoms are different from these atoms. Now, some materials in our universe don't exist with all of the atoms looking identical to each other. Some things are made out of different atoms stuck together. So in this box, we have got particles that are made up of three atoms all stuck together, chemically joined together. And the three atoms that are chemically joined together are not identical to each other, so this can't be an element. This is a compound because a compound exists where you've got different types of atom that are chemically joined together. So we've still got atoms in our compound because that's an atom, and that's an atom, and that's an atom, but they're not all the same. Now, anything that does exist as an element, where all of the atoms are exactly the same, will be listed on the periodic table. So this element we've got in this box, this could be carbon, which is here on the periodic table. So we'll label that as carbon. And remember, it's an element because all of the atoms inside are exactly the same. Now, this element here is different. This goes round in pairs. This could be something like oxygen. And oxygen can exist as an element, which is why it's found on the periodic table. Now, what we can do as chemists is we can take one element and we can react it with another element, and we can make something new, which is a compound. So in this example, if we take carbon and we react it with oxygen, we can make carbon dioxide. And carbon dioxide is this thing here, and it's a compound because it's made out of two different types of atom chemically stuck together, and it goes round in threes. So just to recap what we've got across the top row, we have got carbon atoms on their own in a box making an element because all of the atoms are exactly the same. We have got oxygen atoms in a box making up the element oxygen, and it's an element because all of the atoms are exactly the same. This element comes in pairs, and that's fine. Carbon can come in all different numbers, so in this case I've just drawn it on its own. Some elements come in twos, some of them come in eights, so it doesn't really matter, but because they're all the same, it's an element. Here we've got what happens, what is formed if you react this element carbon with this element oxygen. The atoms pair up like this, and they form a compound called carbon dioxide. there is one more way that we could arrange these atoms. I'm going to show you down here, because this is the other substance that you need to know about. So in this box down here, we have got two different types of atom. We have got carbon atoms and we've got oxygen atoms in the same place, in the same box. So this can't be an element because all of the atoms inside the box are not identical to each other, they're not exactly the same. And it's not a compound either because the oxygen and the carbon are not chemically bound together. So it's not an element and it's not a compound. This is the sort of substance where I could pull all of the oxygen particles out and I could pull all of the carbon particles out and I could separate them. I couldn't do that with a compound because they're chemically joined together, but I can do that here because this is a mixture. So a mixture is made up of different elements or compounds that are not chemically joined together. Okay, so mixtures and compounds get confused sometimes. This one's chemically joined together, this one isn't. So in our boxes here, this is what we've got. So we have got elements, are things that exist where every atom is exactly the same. So this is one element and this is a different element. They don't necessarily need to go around on their own, like these ones. They could go in pairs or in eights or in all sorts of different numbers. And anything that is an element that can exist on its own with all of the atoms looking identical is listed on the periodic table of elements. If you've got a substance like carbon dioxide, which doesn't exist with all of the atoms looking identical, then it will not be listed on the periodic table. So you will not find carbon dioxide anywhere on here because it's not an element. It is a compound of carbon and oxygen chemically joined together. If the atoms in here are not chemically joined together, they would look something like this, and this is a mixture, and this can be separated out into its two different elements. This one can't be separated out. So we've got elements, we've got compounds, and we've got mixture, and atoms are the particles that exist in an element or in a compound or in a mixture. They are the small particles, we draw them as circles, and they are the smallest particles that can exist by themselves. So I hope that helps.